Well, joining us here in LA, James Lacy, the author of Taxophonia and a Donald Trump supporter, and Michael Hiltzik, a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the Los Angeles Times. Gentlemen, welcome. Good to have you with us. James, let me start with you. Give me your thoughts on this speech today delivered by Donald Trump, and specifically answer the charge from those who say there wasn't enough detail here for this to be called a strategy.
You know, I just have to roll my eyes when I hear Lindsey Graham saying that Ronald Reagan would be rolling over in his grave. You know, this foreign policy speech lays out an essentially Reagan-esque type of foreign policy. I worked in the Reagan administration, the International Trade Administration, and you know, Reagan wanted peace through strength. That was not an interventionist presidency. You know, outside of the Grenada incursion, dropping some bombs on Gaddafi, and the unfortunate early activity in Beirut, there was no intervention in Ronald Reagan's presidency. What he did was he really built up the military. He really built up the Navy, and he built up the Air Force. And what was the result? The result was, a few years into the next presidency, the fall of the Berlin Wall. So I think that this was a good move by Donald Trump, and I think it's classic Ronald Reagan-type foreign policy.
Would you acknowledge some of the contradictions, and Michael, to bring you in here to join the conversation? There are those who say this was a speech that was rich in contradictions here, and it was incoherent. That's what the critics say.
Well, the contradictions are only part of the problem. It was self-contradictory. It was policy-free, as Jim Sciutto pointed out. It was full of misrepresentations, and I think it was the Donald Trump that voters around the country have come to know, and that's a deeply ignorant man who really does not know anything about the world outside his brain. And he did not, it's bluster, it's schoolyard bullying, it's not a realistic approach to the world or to foreign policy.
Clearly this speech did not impress the foreign policy experts, but Michael, did it have to? Because what Trump has tapped into is the message, and some of the messages which he outlined in this speech will be very appealing to a certain part of the Republican electorate and the Democratic electorate as well.
Well, there's nothing new about that message. What his task really was in the speech was to go beyond the sloganeering that he engages in at his rallies, and to show that he's got a thoughtful approach and a consistent approach to the outside world. And this he utterly failed to do, because essentially what the speech was a repetition of those slogans with, in fact, this totally ahistorical reference to America First. He clearly didn't understand that America First, to people who know their history, is not only an isolationist slogan, but an anti-Semitic slogan.
James,
I find it hard to believe that Donald Trump is anti-Semitic in using that terminology. You know, times change.
He used the
and
terminology,
I think, just to speak, I think you take an old-fashioned view, to be quite honest with you. You know, the reality today is not to make America safe for democracy. Times have changed since the Woodrow Wilson foreign policy that I think you're advocating. Today, it's a question of making America safe in a dangerous world, which is a completely different equation.
America First was a slogan against the Rooseveltian
I completely reject the notion that you're trying to build it. What you're trying to do is fit a square peg into a round hole. You're trying to say that Donald Trump, whose daughter is Jewish, is anti-Semitic. And what you're doing is taking a foreign policy issue and going off on a tangent. And this is what's wrong with America's politics.
No, what I'm saying is that he's not that he's anti-Semitic, but that he's
That's what I hear you saying.
That he's so ignorant that he didn't realize he was using an anti-Semitic slogan.
I don't think America First is an anti-Semitic slogan.
Well, but you don't know your history either.
You're the one who's stuck up on it. The reality is this. This is a dangerous world. The Clinton-Obama foreign policy has utterly failed us. Nation building has utterly failed us. Look what it did for us in Iraq. Look what it did for us in Egypt. Look what it did for us in Libya. Look at the dead bodies that we have at the Benghazi embassy.
But James,
are you trying to say that that's somehow a good thing?
I think the problem with the speech a lot of people have is that there was a lot of what is wrong. There wasn't a lot of how. And how are you going to fix it?
It seems to me that the principal thing that Donald Trump was saying is that we have to rebuild our military. And he did give specifics on the problems of our Navy and the problems of our Air Force declining under this president. You know, you work for the LA Times, and you can't be said to be a nonpartisan person when you work for a newspaper that said during the election campaign in 2008, 5-column headline, Obama captivates the world. Okay, this is supposed to be from a nonpartisan newspaper. That was when he went on his speech in Germany. Well, what does the world think of him now? The world completely...
You know, that's all totally irrelevant, and it has nothing to do with what I see on the screen and what I see from Trump. The fact of the matter is he did not have any suggestions. He was basically, this was just another episode of schoolyard bullying. He said,
it wasn't bullying, it was a speech. It was a staid foreign policy
He said that ISIS is going to be on the run, but he didn't say how. He didn't show any understanding that if you are dealing with foreign policy, there's a give and take that's involved, or you don't accomplish anything. And when you talk about the disaster in Iraq, I think you really need to acknowledge that that was a disaster that was created by George W. Bush, not by Obama.
Right. Gentlemen, we're going to pause on the Trump policy speech because there'll be many more days ahead for us to dissect it.
We'll come back next hour.
We'll come back next hour, exactly. But let's talk about the other big news in the world of politics, and that happened with Donald Trump's nearest challenger, or quite far behind, Ted Cruz announcing Carly Fiorina as his running mate. What did you make of that? Many saying it smacked of desperation. Many just asking how much of a boost she could possibly give to his flagging hopes.
Well, I think it's obvious that she cannot give much of a boost to Cruz's hopes because Fiorina, as a candidate herself, was measured down in the low single digits in terms of her popularity. Certainly in California, she's a deeply unpopular person. She lost, in 2010, she lost a campaign against Barbara Boxer for the U.S. Senate in a year when Boxer was thought to be very, very vulnerable. And Fiorina put a lot of her own money into the campaign, and she got...
She got beaten by 10 points.
She got killed, essentially, in electoral terms. She claims to be a great businesswoman. We know her record at Hewlett-Packard was absolutely dismal. It was one of the worst performing technology companies of that era, in an era when few technology companies did well, but hers did much worse than others. She showed no imagination as a leader. She made a lot of blunders. And then on the campaign trail in this last cycle, she presented herself as sort of the female candidate and took on policies that were deeply anti-woman.
Okay, last word to James very quickly.
Yeah, I think we agree on a lot of what you just said. Carly Fiorina did, I think, a little better than you would have her in the 2010 election. But the reality is this. Carly Fiorina left this state. She moved to Virginia. She's paying lower taxes. She doesn't vote here anymore. She never voted for Ronald Reagan. She wasn't even registered to vote on that whole period of time. And I think the killer for her in trying to help Cruz in California will be the fact that she publicly stated in 2010 that she would vote to confirm Sotomayor, Obama's nominee for the Supreme Court. This whole election is about the Supreme Court. Carly Fiorina is not going to help Ted Cruz with conservatives in California when that comes out.
Okay, James and Michael, thank you very much for being with us. And we'll talk to you again next hour.
We'll pick this up. It's not over.
Not over yet. Thank you. We shall move on.